Good afternoon, gentlemen and lady. Welcome back again. This is a continuation of what we started last week. My apologies that my video is acting up. Earlier on, the video was working when we were testing with Noor and Mr. Edwards, and out of the blue, my video has now turned red. But having said that, we continue. I would like us to each maybe take a moment just to reintroduce ourselves, and then we can be able to continue with the session. Kenal, we can start with you.
Good afternoon to everyone from SHAPE Mons, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe. I am Colonel Sangul from Turkish Army. I'm working in SHAPE J4 strategic plans, and I've been here 2 months. I have a 23 years supply experience in Turkish Army, and I've deployed 3 times before, first in Afghanistan and 2 times in Kosovo, KFOR. Glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity here to this privileged audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Captain?
Johnny, thank you. I'm Captain John Tully. I am the Director of Africa Engagements at U.S. Naval Forces Africa and U.S. Sixth Fleet in Naples, Italy. I'm a U.S. Navy Foreign Area Officer, and I've been here in Naples for about 3 years, but have spent the past 14 years or so focusing on mainly security cooperation, security assistance, and engagements in Africa. So thank you very much. Honored to be here.
Great. Thank you very much. Captain? Captain in the U.S.? Okay, Koos, please, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. I'm Koos Joubert from DCD Protected Mobility. I'm the technical advisor, and we manufacture armored vehicles for NATO countries, for the African Union, for the United Nations, and then a lot of countries in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koos. Edward, can we go to you, sir?
Yeah, my name is Edward Amek. I'm the team leader for the freight forwarding team in New York in the United Nations Procurement Division. I've been in the UN Common System for just over 20 years, and I'm responsible for the procurement of transportation, logistics services for both UN-owned equipment and contingent-owned equipment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, since this is for the benefit of those who would be answering questions, I think let me also handle the introduction. I'm Johnny Chabalala. I'm chairing this session. I'm from South Africa, and I represent a company called Bruzatec, though I must also put it out there that I represent 2 companies. That is Bruzatec, and I also represent Armigère. I think, gentlemen, we are ready to can field questions, and I will just wait to see Noah. I'm expecting her to manage the questions that are coming in from people. However, I think we can probably see them. Now, there is a question. No, that is not a question. Okay. Please, is there a directory for verified and approved list of vendor contacts for equipment and supply which the US Naval or NATO and UN use for their missions? Is there such a thing? I think the first person to take that would likely be yourself, Edward.
Well, I would say so. What we expect to do is for vendors to do is to register first in UNGM, United Nations Global Marketplace, as a vendor. And once you are registered, your company then will have to express interest in supplying a particular product. And that way you then become put on the list. So recently we we actually have an ongoing EOI, which is a request for expression of interest for freight forwarding services and for, strategic movements for COE. So once you express your interest, we then include you on the list of those invited companies. So you really have to be registered and express interest.
Okay.
That's what we do.
Maybe as a question of interest from my side, when NATO is procuring services from vendors, do they have a concern when it is the same company providing such services all the time? Mr. Edward, if you want to take that as well.
Well, yes, for the UN side, we look at it and try, because we need to have as much international competition as possible. We know we get best value for money for our stakeholders through competition. So we really analyze the situation to understand why we have only one company doing this. Is when we have business seminars in different regions of the world to try and get as many companies to participate as possible and to sort of advertise our procurement activities. So yes, we get concerned.
Right. From our gentleman in uniform, if I may ask this, when you deploy to missions, do you have private companies from your respective countries supporting you and also being on the ground with you in the mission areas? You can tackle that question in no particular order.
I'll jump in and answer that first. I think I would say that for the U.S. Navy, most of the support that we receive during port visits, et cetera, is contracted. And that is contracted through an open process that's handled, at least for this area of the world, through our Fleet Logistics Center in Sigonella, Sicily. And most of the companies, many of the companies that end up winning those contracts are in fact not U.S. companies that do that.
Okay. Colonel?
From my perspective, and depending on my experience, especially the food and the class 1 goods is open to the procurement process. And during the deployment in Afghanistan and Kosovo, there are too many companies reluctant to wanted to enter this process. So it depends on the mission, on the weather, even weather, and people tries to find solution according to the mission. Or
okay. Captain, anyone that would like to add anything to or answer to my question? Okay, let's move on. Again to Mr. Eck in NATO, I mean in the UN. Is there any barriers that you guys have seen with new players of in terms of system suppliers that may struggle when they have to maybe be considered as vendors and suppliers in the UN?
Well, you see, the UN has different levels of registration, where we sort of limit based on the size of your company, your financial statements, in terms of the amount of business that you can get per individual contracts. So we have the basic level, we have level 1 and level 2. So the company has to decide. There's really no barriers, but you have to decide the appropriate level that you want to be registered on. Though you would find that certain movements like the movements of contingent-owned equipment that involve ship charter, a big logistic operation to move a battalion into a peacekeeping mission, can take a lot of financial resources, which might be difficult for a smaller, inexperienced company. So that might be a barrier for the smaller companies that don't have sufficient resources, and for those that don't have experience in operating in certain areas that we operate in.
Okay.
But the UN on its own does not impose any barriers. We open it for everybody.
So if I understand you correctly, then it means a company must be established and must have supplied to other countries before it can actually be considered for a big contract with the UN.
Not necessarily. Yes, experience is important. We have that requirement for these contingent-owned equipment movements. Obviously, you need to have some kind of experience of having moved some military equipment through international borders and ports. You need that experience. Otherwise, it becomes a disaster.
Right. Now, for an original equipment manufacturer, is there a consideration of whether his systems, vehicles, or weapons have been used or have they supplied to somebody else before they try and vendor or supply the UN?
Well, I'll basically say the principles of the UN are generally the same. We don't specify a brand or to say we have our requirements as being generic. So I would say I wouldn't, because I don't deal directly with weapons, but I would assume that the rules are the same. Everything is evaluated against the same sort of criteria based on the scope of work. If it meets the requirement, then it is considered. Obviously, experience and the functioning of the equipment and all that might be considered as a requirement inside the scope of work for consideration.
Thank you. Koos, in your experience dealing with the UN, are there any challenges that you've identified, maybe that we could tackle here, and maybe get the experience of the captains and the colonel in terms of how they dealt with them in their respective countries?
We don't have any specific problems with the UN or the AU. One of the problems we do have in delivering equipment to the troop contributing countries is with commercial liners. I think the pandemic is part of the problem. Ships are booked in advance. Freight is a problem. You don't always get your load on in time. And this is really a problem for the TCC who would want his equipment. So we have those type of challenges, which is slightly different than 2-3 years ago. Otherwise, we don't have any issues.
Thank you very much. Colonel Jijit and maybe Captain Truly again, or the captains, the missions would always differ, and then countries land in the mission area and then they need to jointly execute missions. How do you normally deal with training and simulation and rehearsals of your plans and strategies before deployment, as soon as everything and everyone reports at the mission area through the UN? Anyone can tackle that if you have a response. And let me give you the background. The British forces, when they deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq, they would normally converge in a town called Nanyuki in Kenya, where through the DTAS program, they would do live simulation exercises before they deploy. Now we've seen in Mozambique, the forces are there. However, I don't think they had enough time to do rehearsals before they left. And what I've picked up is that the European Union has now launched a European Union military training in Mozambique so that they can do training and rehearsals in country. My question again is, do we have experience of having done that in mission areas, especially as soon as troop contributing countries have already arrived in the mission area?
I can answer that from a maritime perspective. In the African and as well as the European theaters, most of the units that we have that come into this area for operations will be coming from the continental United States. And that process of training and certification before deployment is handled there. So by the time the units get to us, they should already have been through that entire certification and training process and be ready to conduct whatever operations are assigned upon arrival.
Okay. Colonel, you've got anything?
Yeah, before deploying, there are two types of beforehand training. In your country, you can find the same terrain and weather conditions in a region in your country for 15 days or whatever, for 1 month. You can train and exercise especially about the conditions over there, and then and second, you can pre-deploy your forward logistic elements to the country where you will deploy, and they will work on the terrain and weather conditions, and the contractors, whatever, then deploy the main unit after 1 month or 2 to 3 months, whatever. There are two types, I mean, over.
Thank you very much. One thing I know from our side as well is that, and this is why I'm trying to explain my question further. It is because all countries would, of course, have done their own training in country before they deploy. From our side, people will also do mission training, and later on they'll do mission specific training. And when they are deploying with the UN or the African Union, there will be a team to also do evaluation, and they pass and they carry on. But most of the time, you'd find that troop contributing countries meet for the first time in the mission area. And my question is that maybe there should be considerations for in the future to make sure that there is that joint simulated exercises and training before they deploy. Within the African Union in the past, there were exercises like Amani Africa, which was done for all the forces that were from troop contributing countries. And the South African forces also did an exercise with the US called Operation or Mission Accord, which was done in Port Elizabeth in South Africa, where they were simulating oil spillage and how they would react and things like that. However, those are about 4, if not 5 years old. And I haven't seen new exercises which were simulated. So my question was really to understand if it happens at that level where you now have all forces, or it's still that everybody does it on their own.
We do actually quite a bit of combined exercises in the maritime. We've got 3 major ones that we do around the continent each year that focus on just that, on practicing responses to a pretty broad spectrum of activities and incidents at sea, whether those are acts of piracy, smuggling, environmental challenges, fishing, things like that. And we do one in the Mediterranean, one in the Indian Ocean, and then another one in the Atlantic, which each have a pretty good and pretty broad spectrum of participation in them. And they run the gamut from, as I said, these at-sea events where ships and aircraft from the participating countries will work together. That's usually preceded by some import drills to make sure that everyone is on the same page as to how we're going to operate. And then we'll typically wrap that up with a meeting of the senior leaders in the countries to review what went on in the exercise and talk about perhaps some bigger picture items that are of interest to the region when it comes to maritime security.
Thank you very much, Captain. Any comment from your side, Colonel?
Nothing more, but the NATO NATO side, Steadfast series exercises are completed this year. Seems the answer of your question. Steadfast series exercises aim to combine the nations for the further deployment. I mean, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you. I would have expected that the communities would have pushed a whole lot of questions and keep us busy so that we can respond to their questions and enlighten each other and learn from one another. And but that's it that we had time for today. If I can allow you a minute each to give your closing remark where you'd like to put a point or two across, let me allow you. And maybe let me do it in reverse this time. Koos, let me start with you.
Yes, thank you. Just to come back to the joint operations and training within the SADC region, I remember some of these training exercises taking place at the Combat Training Center in South Africa. Now, to me, that is essential. You cannot deploy if you don't have joint operations training. There are so many interfaces between different countries, weaponry, communication systems, doctrine, which you must clarify. So I just want to emphasize how important that point is about joint training. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ek? Edward?
Oh, yeah. Well, I just want to mention that we are also affected in terms of the current situation in the maritime industry, the shortage of containers, shortage of vessels. We are just as affected as everybody else at the moment, and we are also battling to get space like everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Captain Trulli?
Johnny, thank you for the opportunity here to make a couple of closing remarks. I agree with Edward in the UN. The maritime situation is really challenging, and we're seeing that. I think we're all still seeing the effects of COVID on our ability to get out and do things. And as we're trying to get back to operating, and working with partners, working with allies the way we did before COVID, we're finding that some of the logistics muscles have atrophied a little bit, and some of the relationships, aren't quite the same as they were. So it's becoming a bit challenging in some cases to relearn some lessons that we think we already knew. But it's a great time to get back out there, and we're really looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Colonel?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm glad to be with you guys. All the logistics problems are almost same in Africa, United Nations or NATO. We will figure out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think in my closing, I would like to also stress why I targeted the issue of training and simulation. Is that, many at times, because all our systems are very different from design and their characteristics and applications and things like that, it is very important that we address the interoperability issues and understand the capabilities of each system before we go out there and do a joint deployment. And I would like to really thank you very, very much again for taking part in this session and sharing your experiences and knowledge. And I hope we will catch up soon and we'll be able to tackle new other issues affecting our different countries and armed forces in the deployment areas. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. Please have a great evening and morning further, depending on where you sit in the world.
Thank you.